Hello, radical people. My name is Dr. Arianna Howard. I am an educator, author, activist, master trainer, and leading cultural diversity expert. After 14 years of service and a lifetime of trauma, my approach to education is radical. To be radical means to affect the fundamental nature of something. My mission is to affect the fundamental nature of education. This video is for all the adults who support the development and well-being of children. I call us educational caregivers. All the mothers, fathers, grandparents, play cousins, teachers, principals, social workers, coaches, bus drivers, HR directors, psychologists, drug and alcohol and mental health workers. If you support the development and well-being of children, this message is for you. Now, for many years, we've been on opposing teams. Families on one side doing the best they can to juggle all of life's demands and blaming schools for not doing enough. School systems on the other side doing the best they can to meet all children's needs with no support, blaming families for not being involved enough. Well, COVID-19 turned everyone into teachers, and the televised murders of Black people made everyone anti-racist. All of a sudden, we're on the same team. Now that we're on the same team, let's be as loud for educational reform as we are for police reform. It is a critical part of the solution to injustice. Let's demand anti-racist, trauma-informed, culturally responsive education for all children and the adults who support them. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about three things. 1, racial trauma, racial anxiety, and how these are playing out right now. 2, a brief history of American schooling and how it relates to racial justice. And 3, I'm going to equip you with some everyday activism tools and action items. Are you ready? So what is trauma? Simply put, it's events or circumstances that are harmful and affect our ability to function normally. And we're all experiencing trauma in this moment, yes? Some of us have been experiencing it for generations, and some of us are just now becoming aware. I want to take a moment to talk about a specific type of trauma many of us have been experiencing for generations: racial trauma. Now, doctors and researchers were curious about the increased prevalence of post-traumatic stress disorder in people of color. They wanted to know, why is this happening? Well, they found that racial trauma is part of the answer. Simply being a person of color living in a white world can be traumatic. We experience things like workplace discrimination, microaggressions, which are those unintentional words or acts against people of color that may not intend to be racist, but they feel racist. We also experience hate crimes like the ones we've been witnessing as of late. Now, doctors and researchers took this work further, and they were able to link trauma and DNA. They started with the descendants of Holocaust survivors, and they noticed that they were experiencing symptoms of the Holocaust, but they hadn't experienced the Holocaust. Doctors and researchers found out that trauma is encoded in our DNA and passed down through the generations. This is part of the reason why so many of us are angry in this moment. We've been carrying this pain, experiencing this pain, passing it down to our babies. We tired and we fed up. Now, we're all conditioned to be uncomfortable about race. Every single one of us. For some of us, we learned that life is different, that we have to work harder, be better, but we don't talk about it in public. We're told it's too uncomfortable. It just is what it is. And for others, we learn not to see color, not to publicly talk about race. We're taught that it's impolite, it's racist. Now, this discomfort that we're taught shows up as racial anxiety. For people of color, we walk around with a constant fear of being discriminated against. And for white people, there's a constant fear of being viewed as racist. Now, this racial anxiety affects our interactions and becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We shut down communication between each other for fear of being viewed as racist, fear of being discriminated against. And for white people, the discomfort and defensiveness when presented with information on racial inequality and injustice becomes a real thing. You can experience things like guilt, fear, shame, silence, anger, denial. And so, right now, in this moment, when race is in our face, when it's on the table in every social media post, on every news channel, we're being forced to talk about it. But how do we do this when we're taught to be afraid? I am here to tell you it is possible. I do this work with people just like you every day. The first step, to become aware of the ways we've been conditioned. We're going to call it out, educate ourselves about it so we can move forward. We're going to make the resolve to step out of the fear and out of the conditioning. So here's another conditioning that we all receive. We are all conditioned to fear Black and brown bodies. Don't believe me? Recall some villains from cartoon characters during your youth. You will notice that they all have a dark, ominous presence. We are fed the narrative that dark is evil. There are words in the English language that further feed us this narrative to associate evil with darkness. Words like blacklist, blackmail, black sheep, dark cloud on the horizon. Now I want you to recall the good characters in many of the cartoons you grew up watching. You will notice that they either have white skin or are wearing white or light colors. We have been fed this message over and over to associate innocence and beauty with whiteness. Now, these messages are still being perpetuated today. Turn on any cartoon, any movie, and you will see the themes of darkness as evil and lightness as rightness being played before your very eyes. If you travel to countries outside of America, you will notice that skin bleaching is a very popular practice. Now, why is this? Why is there a multi-million-dollar industry dedicated to lightening skin? Because we've been fed the message that the ideal, the beautiful, the innocent, the pretty is white. Every single one of us are conditioned to believe this. Every single one of us. Now, we're hardwired to know this difference. It keeps us alive, right? It helps us know the difference between when a stove is on and when a stove is off. But the problem comes when we assign value to that difference. And for centuries, we've been told that there is a value assigned to the color of our skin. We are fed these messages on TV, in movies, in the news, and in schools. So how does this conditioning play out in schools? I'm so glad you asked. Black students are 3 to 4 times more likely than their white peers to be expelled or face multiple suspensions from school. So are Black students more dangerous than white students? or is something else going on? 13% of our nation's special education classrooms are filled with white students. The other 87% are Black or brown. Are Black and brown children born with more special needs than white children, or is something else going on? 1 in 4 children in gifted education are Black or brown. That means that 3 in 4, or 75% of children in gifted education, are white. Are white students naturally smarter than Black or brown students, or is something else going on? Another conditioning that we receive. We are conditioned to believe that the gold standard is white, middle class, and Christian. Don't believe me? I want you to name 2 female scientists of color. Now, don't go to your phone or your laptop or a smart device. Recall from your education, what were 2 female scientists of color that were studied in your K-12 schooling? Struggling to find names? How about this? Can you name 2 medical discoveries made by doctors of color? Struggling? What is most often students' first exposure to the history of African Americans? Slavery or the fight for equality? Both of these historical moments promote this idea that African Americans are less than human and have had to fight for their humanity. This is the first exposure that students get to African American history. Think about the school calendar. We get days off for President's Day, Easter, Columbus Day, and winter break is scheduled around what holiday? What Christian holiday? Why do we not get time off of school for Ramadan, a sacred time of fasting, cleansing, and prayer? Why don't we celebrate Dia de la Constitución, the recorded date of Mexico's winning back of their land and civil rights from Spanish rule? Why are these dates not acknowledged or celebrated in the school calendar? We've been conditioned to be uncomfortable to talk about race, to fear Black and brown bodies, and to ascribe to a gold standard of white, middle-class Christian values. Every single one of us. The current nature of our education system plays a major role in this conditioning. So what can we do? How in this moment can we make the outcry for educational reform as loud as our cries for police reform? And how can we show up for justice? Stand with me and demand anti-racist, trauma-informed, culturally responsive education for all children and the adults who support them. And we will do this through everyday activism. I've authored an educational caregiver manifesto. The link is in the description below. It lists our rights, our purpose, and our demands as the adults who support the development and well-being of children. Now, the manifesto contains 3 things: a resource list chock full of articles, books, videos for you to educate yourself. Educate yourself first. It is the vital first step of any great social movement. The second piece contained in the Educational Caregiver Manifesto is a 5-point program. We will demand from our local, state, and federal educational agencies quality care for our children and the adults who support them. And the third piece of critical information included in that manifesto is a showing of how to advocate for anti-racist, trauma-informed, culturally responsive education. The manifesto gives you all the tools you need to take action right now. And while we're demanding anti-racist, trauma-informed, culturally responsive education for all children and the adults who support them, we must also learn how to navigate everyday conversations, how to stand up for justice in everyday ways. It's called everyday activism. Okay, now I'm going to give you some tips on how to do everyday activism. First tip, take care of you first. You can opt out of conversations. You do not have to participate. Find things that slows the tailspin for you. Painting, drawing, sleeping, spending time with loved ones. And know that you are allowed to disagree. A second important tip for everyday activism, be a self-cleaning container. If someone comes to you sharing experiences of pain and anger and confusion, you can hold that experience for them. But what I want you to do is clean out those things that weigh you down, that make you feel as if you can't go on, that make you feel exhausted or turned off. Hold the experiences momentarily for the person while they're sharing. And when you go away and depart from that loved one, that coworker, let those experiences pass through you. Seek first to understand. How many grandmamas told you you got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason? And in the age of cell phones, everyone is an expert. But I charge you to seek first to understand another's perspective. Everyday activism. Now, those tried and true acts of kindness still work. Smile as you pass by others. Speak a kind word. Don't believe the hype and decide to be radical and generate positivity wherever you go. Everyday activism is compassion and empathy. Remember that although we've all been conditioned, each of us sees the world from our perspective, our experiences, and the words we've been taught to say. Everyday activism. Your work doesn't have to look like anyone else's. You'll mess up. Sometimes it's not going to feel good, but ignore the pressure to respond to injustice in popular ways, in mainstream ways. Connect with those issues that are important to you. And if you find yourself feeling afraid to speak to your children, afraid to stand up to an injustice you are witnessing, think of the fear many of us live with every day. You got this. Your brothers and sisters are depending on you. Everyday activism. Research and involve yourself in those issues that matter most to you. And I hope education is one of them. Together, let's demand anti-racist, trauma-informed, culturally responsive education for all children and the adults who support them. Now, if you're on the other side of this screen thinking, yes, I want to join you, Dr. Howard, you have 2 action items. 1, download and share the Educational Caregiver Manifesto. The link is below. And 2, I want you to watch a powerful 3-minute clip about the danger of single stories. The link is also in the description below. Now, it's only 3 minutes. You have time. Learn about what it means to have anti-racist, trauma-informed, culturally responsive education. Learn how to put the pressure on school systems to respond to this moment in ways that create systemic change. No more Band-Aids. We must affect the fundamental nature of education. Download that manifesto today. Now, I'm going to do a deep dive into the topics I've touched on here in later videos. But I want to hear from you. Comment below on the topics you'd like to hear more about. And please don't forget to check out my website, radicallearningspaces.com. I have pre-recorded videos and blog posts on many of the topics I've shared today. Start educating yourself today. And please don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. Make this conversation a part of the movement. It's time to counteract the conditioning and demand radical educational reform. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I am here to support you. Be great. Be the change you want to see. Be a radical educational caregiver. Peace.